Despite all my rage, I am still just a rat in a cage.
Doomed Planet. Obituaries for the damned.
Here's my Billy Corgan story. It's May 11th, 1996. The offices of imusic.com in Seattle on Capitol Hill, staying up all night so that I'm not sure why I needed to do that, so that I could plug in some internet doodads for Smashing Pumpkins live on the internet in Dublin. And the owner of the company, Scott, and my co-worker, Bob, were in Dublin to orchestrate this special hype event for imusic.com in cooperation with the Pumpkins management. Try to find high-speed internet in Dublin in 1996, so this was kind of a thing. Unfortunately, a young woman was trampled to death at the concert, and the next day the Smashing Pumpkins were like, take down the website and pretend this concert never happened. And who can blame them? I mean, I guess you have to do that. Welcome to the Doomed Planet podcast, episode 134. I am Alex R. Mayer, your host. And we have, this time around,
Podcast, shout out.
Bald King of Rockstar Podcasts, Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins. People have been squished at rock concerts before. It happens more often, like showing his fists as if he's a verbal pugilist. And again, bald is beautiful. I'm the same age and just as bald. I'm not quite as successful a musician. I have not sold millions and millions of albums. But, we're basically the same person other than that, right? Point that resulted in some fatalities. You don't hear much about the Smashing Pumpkins' death. Just only one unfortunate victim. A Cork teenager crushed in a crowd during a rock concert in Dublin. Bernadette O'Brien, 17, from Shanagarry near Middleton, died in the Mater Hospital yesterday afternoon when a life support machine was turned off. She had suffered severe internal injuries. She was this is from the Irish Times. This is one of the few documents of this event that I can find anywhere without trying too hard. O'Brien was among the estimated 8,500 strong crowd at the Point Theatre in Dublin's Docklands. Concert promoters MCD and the Point Exhibition Company, in a joint statement, extended their sympathy to the O'Brien family and promised a full inquiry into the tragedy. I don't know what happened here. I'm guessing their family got some money from various entities that put on the concert. So it's funny, you could say this was the peak of the Smashing Pumpkins, but I believe that happened with the overdose death that came soon after. And now Billy Corgan, the mastermind of this alt-indie supergroup, has a podcast, The Magnificent Others. He's the graphics for the main graphic for the podcast has him in all his glorious baldness. Make sure no other poor girl dies like my Bernadette, says her dad, who choked back tears as he spoke of his decision to let his daughter attend the rock concert where she was trampled to death. 8,000 frenzied fans got out of hand at the densely packed gig by the Smashing Pumpkins. She idolized the band. She asked well in advance her mom and dad if she could go. We didn't think it would be a problem. We had no idea the mayhem that would be unleashed. Most rock shows do not result in fatalities or even injuries. Traumatic asphyxiation. The real sad part here is that the last thing she heard was the music from the Smashing Pumpkins. Oh, I hated the Smashing Pumpkins so much back then. I hated their music and their well-celebrated, pretentious attitude. And then Billy, 30 years later, Billy Corgan has a podcast and with an impressive lineup of guests, and started listening to that. And now I realize, yes, I hate him again. This is an obituary podcast, so I do want to mention that Bernadette O'Brien, Emmy-nominated costumer on MacGyver, died earlier this year at age 90. She was a native of Dublin, and it's a very common name in Dublin. She also worked on Murder, She Wrote, T.J. Hooker, and other TV shows. She won an Emmy for her work on a King Arthur-themed episode of ABC's MacGyver. She was born in Dublin and migrated to the U.S. in 1955 and settled in Cleveland. Got work with the Shakespeare Festival and moved to L.A. in 1977. Rest in peace to both of those Bernadettes, one that had a long and productive life, and one whose life was cut short in her youth by the Smashing Pumpkins.
I'm still just a rat in a cage.
So I've got to say that the Pumpkins' first album, Gish, is pretty damn punk rock, and I did like that album. It's kind of the stripped down, punk rock by people that can play their instruments. By the time they were promoting Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, a double album that sold millions and millions of copies, by the time they were promoting that in Dublin, I hated them so much, and I hated that album so much. It's so awful. It's so icky. If we can quickly talk about Billy Corgan here. He is a big, tall, bald, scary-looking guy. He co-founded a pro wrestling company. His dad, who he talks about on the show, here's something about Billy's podcast. He cannot shut up, and he talks over his guests, and everything ends up being about him. And it's okay when you have these shared experiences, like you're talking to another rock star and you can relate about something you both experienced, but he talks way too much. His dad was a drug-dealing, gun-toting musician and madman who negatively impacted Corgan's childhood. So his dad was a psycho, and eventually there's one story he told on the pod. When he was rich and famous, his dad would come up and be like, I need 10 grand, no questions asked. And Billy would give him the cash. So he was a fuck up. His dad gave him a Les Paul knockoff guitar. He was listening to Jeff Beck, Jimi Hendrix, Black Sabbath, the same old thing of rockers from this generation getting influenced by Van Halen, Queen, Boston, ELO, Rush, Cheap Trick. Then he discovered the alternative rock genre, which I guess is that 90s sickening Smashing Pumpkins kind of Jane's Addiction kind of thing. He listened to Bauhaus and The Cure. Okay. Decided to forego college and make it as a musician, and he did make it. One thing that came out on the Courtney Love episode of his podcast, we'll get to that at the end here, is that he owned a Corvette in high school, okay? So here, the end of the Smashing Pumpkins, they were never the same, and Billy has since toured with various incarnations of the band. It's never been the same. July 12th, 1996, months after the Dublin death, Touring keyboardist Jonathan Melvoin died in a hotel room in New York of a heroin overdose. After he and Jimmy Chamberlin, band member, used the drug. Chamberlain was later arrested, and they Smashing Pumpkins fired him and began touring as a trio. If I remember correctly, this made big news, and the heroin was packaged as red rum. That was the brand stamped on the, packet of heroin, which backwards spells, of course, murder. Billy is a good self-promoter for sure. Before this podcast, he had a MySpace page called The Confessions of Billy Corgan. He called the guy that died a mean-spirited drug addict. In 2004, he landed on an electronic / shoegaze / alternative rock sound. Oh, no. Shoegaze. Isn't that like sort of bands like Modest Mouse? Like, no comment. Modest Mouse. Boy, that's badass, man. Of course, the Seattle's Murder City Devils thought they were badass too, and I guess they were just also only musicians and not actual murderers or Satanists. By the way, Billy, control freak who on many of the albums recorded all the parts himself, drums and bass and whatnot. He's a good guitarist too, really good guitarist. There's one libertarian notion he has on his podcast where he talks about his dad gave him good advice, which is if you're going to make it as a musician, be the best fucking guitarist you can be. Be like Albert King or Jimi Hendrix, because anything less and you're not going to make it, which is not true, but it's a great fantasy about, the meritocracy. The meritocracy of cock rock, disguised as alternative rock. I don't know what this fucking pro wrestling thing is. I looked into it, and Billy Corgan is really into pro wrestling, and he owns a pro wrestling company. It's hard to figure out how big a company that is or profitable. The mental health section of his Wikipedia page, apparently he's struggled with anxiety, depression, panic attacks, self-harm, obsessive compulsive disorder, and suicidal ideation. So that is bad, and this is not a likable guy, and his music is awful to me and many others, but you can't wish that on anyone, and I hope that doesn't end up badly. Apparently he's a Christian. He prays each morning to be... Okay. He's a ladies' man who has been in many relationships. He dated briefly Courtney Love before she made her way to Seattle to mate with other rock stars.
When I went to school. Oh.
This is something I didn't know. In 2006, he moved in with Courtney and her daughter, Frances Bean Cobain. He had his own wing in her Hollywood Hills mansion. So on again, off again, love-hate relationship, culminating in this great podcast episode that just came out where Billy interviews Courtney. He's been in a relationship with Chloe Mendel, and they have 3 children, and it's a May-December romance. He's 20 years older, 30 years older, so good for him. She looks attractive and cute and nice, and she's a family person. Interviewed by Alex Jones in 2016, Corgan voiced discontent with, quote, social justice warriors, comparing them to Maoists, cult members, and the Ku Klux Klan. In 2018, he called himself a free market libertarian capitalist. Much like our dim-witted and also bald friend Chris Novoselic, bassist for Nirvana. And capitalist he is. Now, he wrote most of the music for the Pumpkins and, so retained the publishing rights. That's where a lot of the money is. Those albums sold millions. He does mention at one point that he got stiffed by the record companies and, they make the majority of the money from these ventures. But you got to think by the time that double album Melancholy came out, they sold millions of copies. They were getting a good deal. They had an agent at that point, and they were negotiating for how much money they're going to soak out of every sale, right, and every concert. He's a pescatarian. He shares songwriting credit on several of Hole's 1998 album Celebrity Skin, and he has a podcast, so let's look into that.
Podcast, shout out.
The first episode of Billy Corgan's The Magnificent Others features Gene Simmons, so he's getting the heavy hitters here, and that caught my eye right away, and I thought, okay, let's see where he goes with this. Gene Simmons, of course, the blood and tongue mastermind of the rock band Kiss. And then the very next episode was Tom Morello. Now, that's one of my... Rage Against the Machine is one of my favorite bands from the 90s. It's incredible. What an incredible rock band. Incredible music. Tom's son is now a shredder on guitar. So Billy's got the heavy hitters here. And then Sharon Osbourne is on. Now, love her or hate her, Sharon Osbourne is rock and roll royalty. Her dad, Don Arden, was a famous, somewhat mobbed up rock promoter. And then, the story goes Sharon fell in love with Ozzy and then bought out Ozzy's contract from her dad, and then went on to make Ozzy one of the greatest stars of the 80s. Again, when you're selling no one sells millions and millions and millions of albums anymore. And, furthermore, then she gets her family, her kids involved, and Ozzy with a hugely successful reality TV show. After that, Billy hosted Wolfgang Van Halen. Really nice guy. This guy does not have a mean bone in his body. I did think that Billy kept steering him back to his dad, the great Eddie Van Halen, over and over. And you can't if you're a guitarist and your dad is Eddie Van Halen, there's no way to step out from under that. I think they discussed that. Howie Mandel. Okay, now Billy is branching out to celebrities that aren't necessarily musicians. I know in our previous episode we talked about Daniel House has a podcast, and he's the Seattle grunge guy, and he's pulling in all these great guests from the grunge scene. Well, Billy is pulling everyone from the entire rock scene and also celebrities. Pat Benatar and Neil Giraldo, her husband, are featured. Corey Feldman. That's one of those episodes I listened to about 3 minutes of and then said no. Richie Sambora, top A-list rock star from Bon Jovi, the Carrot Top. So one wonders if they are actually getting paid a fee to be on the show, because or they just, I don't know, I think it's good publicity for a star, and their agents are saying, why don't you go on Billy Corgan's podcast right now? Dale Bozzio, Carney Wilson, Robbie Krieger from The Doors. Great guy, great guitarist. The Doors, from that generation, where in the 8th grade we thought they were really cool. Now I realize they were awful, and that Jim Morrison is sort of like a drag queen that writes bad poetry full of cliches. The first, I know on the Doom Planet podcast, we discuss rock biographies. One of the very first credible ones was No One Here Gets Out Alive by Danny Sugarman, who was an associate of the band. And again, I'm from that generation where I could not put that book down. I thought it was incredible. Paul Stanley from Kiss is interviewed in a 2-part episode. Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees. Paul Williams. Danny Elfman. Is there a more successful musician and composer than Danny Elfman? Steve Vai, the king of shredders. I think because Billy is such a good, talented musician and guitarist in his own right, he's friends with all these other A-list shredders like Steve Vai. Mary Lou Henner, you might remember her for starring in the TV show Taxi long ago. Devo? I'm not sure if I listened to that or which member is on there. Daryl Hall from Hall & Oates. Malcolm McDowell, the famous movie star and star of A Clockwork Orange. Rudy Sarzo from Quiet Riot. And then suddenly Michelin star chef Curtis Duffy. I don't know, that's coming out of the blue there. There's some non-celebrity guests and there's a chef. Why not? Wendy Dio, the widow of rock star Ronnie James Dio. Vernon Reid from Living Colour. Linda Blair. Penn Jillette, didn't listen to that, famous loudmouth magician and brilliant guy. Nancy Wilson of Heart. Jack Osborne. And Melissa Aufdermar, who was I think discovered by Billy, was in the band Hole with Courtney Love and also has toured with the Smashing Pumpkins. She was recruited by Billy to be the bassist in Hole in 1994. She's on several of their releases, including the classic Celebrity Skin, the follow-up to Live Through This, which came out right after Kurt was committed suicide. She's also a photographer and actress. She's kind of a rich kid or a bougie kid. Her dad is journalist and politician Nick Aufdermar. Her mom is a literary translator and journalist, Linda Gabre. Swiss-German family. You can't be from Switzerland and not be rich. She went to an alternative high school. So yeah, she became friends with Billy at a Smashing Pumpkins concert. They became pen pals. Did they have sex or not? I don't care. And he's like, you're going to join my friend Courtney's band, according to Wikipedia. You're getting on a plane to Seattle tomorrow. And I did, she said. Kristen Paff of Hole died in 1994. It's one of those rock star deaths that's underrepresented in the media. And then Melissa joined up with Hole. Charlie Benanti, the drummer for Anthrax, says he, quote, agrees with Billy Corgan's claim that rock music was intentionally pushed out of mainstream culture in the late 90s, calling it a coup. And Billy Corgan has previously said in his podcast that he saw an overt shift at MTV around 1997 or 1998, saying rock was purposely dialed down. Okay, so maybe the rise of hip-hop, which was exploding at the time, had something to do with that. So right before we started recording this episode, Billy dropped the Courtney Love interview. Of course, both these people love to be interviewed, love to hear themselves talk. They have a long relationship, and just to be clear, Courtney is very smart, very talented. There's a touch of evil in there. She is a star fucker. She slept with Billy Corgan and then was like, okay, see ya. I'm going to Seattle to seek out more rock stars to sleep with. And as far as groupies that struck it rich, that would be her, because she inherited the majority of Kurt's estate, and which was a lot of money, but also the rights to all his music throw off millions and millions of dollars per year. And yeah, Billy, you're right. Like the whole indie alt, Smashing Pumpkins, indie shit thing did die in the late 90s. Thank God. Buzz Osborne of the Melvins. An interesting story. Like the kick-ass band that influenced Nirvana. They were friends with Kurt. Moved to LA right when the grunge was breaking, so that was a mistake. They never got huge. And he's an odd character. I mean, now he's 60 years old. You know, any dude standing up on stage playing like garage band rock and roll who is 60 years old, it's kind of silly. Buzz's theory about Courtney Love's involvement in Kurt Cobain's death is an issue. That's why Courtney Love hates Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth. I didn't realize, but yes, I used to make fun of Sonic Youth, calling them Sonic old people. And Kim Gordon is 72 years old. And Courtney Love dishes, and Billy dish on her in this podcast episode. And of course, the late Kurt Cobain, he tried, he idolized Sonic Youth because they were the ultimate indie hipster street cred band that hadn't sold out. And that was his fantasy, is that you could do that and maintain your credibility, even if Sonic Youth never sold a lot of albums, but they were, the epitome of cool. And I guess there was some friction between Sonic Youth and Kim and Kurt and Courtney. So in this episode, Courtney rehashes her wild childhood for the millionth time. His dad worked for the Grateful Dead, and she was given LSD as a child multiple times. Many in our generation were. I'm not sure if I was, probably. She was around Haight-Ashbury in the 70s, and it was like a run-down, shitty place, apparently. So she was in the San Francisco music scene when she's 18 years old. And so there was, meth everywhere. And then, this is true, people mythologize the San Francisco Haight-Ashbury hippie scene. And according to Courtney, the whole Summer of Love thing, they just used the same footage over and over, like 2 days in Golden Gate Park, which is partially true. The whole Fillmore scene was dark. Courtney, you were too young to have experienced this except as a tot on LSD. Janis Joplin ended up on Smack, ended up in sex work. Okay. But then she got famous and died. She was adopted by rich Italians who I adored, who couldn't have children, who wanted a blonde, blue-eyed child. Courtney says her mother is mostly Jewish, but she's blonde and blue-eyed. Courtney's mother was, quote, a bit of a groupie. She had fur coat, hot pants, and looks a little like Marianne Faithfull. All her friends, her best friend was Abigail Folger, of course, from victim of the Manson family. So there's some money in the family. This is weird. So Billy says, I'm married to a Jew and my kids are Jews. A Chinese Jew, though. Dynasties. I wish I thought in dynasties. Okay, what? The half of his wife's family is dynastic, with bloodlines going back 5,000 years. Courtney claims that she went to a neurologist and asked, what's it like for kids who are doing LSD repeatedly when they're under the age of 10? And the neurologist said, well, you're pretty chaotic. All the people that happened to, you're really OCD and controlling and all really open-minded. So, okay. So dishing on dishing on Kim Gordon. They're like, oh yeah, her ex-husband is really cool, but she was not. Claiming that Kim sold all of Thurston's vinyl for a vast amount of money to pay for their daughter's education. She and Billy claim that these hipster riot girls from the Olympia, Portland, feminist scene hated her because she was a class traitor. I'm trying to figure out what that means. It's really a bunch of gibberish here. Two freaks talking back and forth with very little sense of self-awareness. Okay, I've said enough. I've made my peace. I've relived the nightmare of the 90s music scene. By the way, when I was, working on that Pumpkins Live from Dublin project, that was the peak of my insanity of working for this company, iMusic. And it's funny. Some of the best stories I have come from friends or family members or people like Scott at iMusic who get a free pass. Like, I'm just not going to, bygones, and I'm not going to talk about them or pod about them. I will say that Scott, a year or two after I was no longer at iMusic, wrote me a very large check. That could be the reason. Oh, an hour and 45 minutes of listening to Courtney Love and Billy Corgan talk to each other in a wide-ranging, freewheeling conversation that always goes back to the glory days of the 90s. And popular, too. 300,000 or more views on YouTube. Did you know you can watch podcasts? It's a thing. I know Doom Planet is on YouTube, but we don't record me sitting here in my wife's basement talking into a microphone. It would not be interesting. And I don't get that. Like, is someone really going to YouTube and turning on Billy's podcast and then just sitting there and watching people talk? And maybe it's one of those things where, well, people love the freedom of having the visual there if they want, but they're cleaning their house or something. I mean, that's how I listen to podcasts. I'm doing something else while listening to a podcast. I'm not just numb to it, or, like when you watch TV and you're just passive. According to garbage music website Stereo Gum, and I don't mean Shirley Manson and the band Garbage, though they are cool. I mean, garbage as in the internet is garbage. Billy Corgan and Courtney Love go way back. She claims Siamese Dream, their second album, when they became less punk rock and more fake weird, is about her. They both received hipster scorn in the late 90s. The pernicious and horrific meanness of the indie community at the time, Love says. She's friends with Thurston Moore of Sonic Youth. He was never a gatekeeper type. His partner was the worst. Okay, so that was a little kerfuffle that we mentioned earlier. Kim Gordon is no fan of Love or Corgan. She had harsh words for both in her 2015 memoir, Girl in a Band. I think I read that. Did we do a podcast about that? Kim Gordon comes from a hipster family, right? So she was hanging out and meeting with celebrities and underground figures as a teen. According to Kim, she wrote, Courtney asked us for advice about her secret affair with Billy Corgan. I thought, ew, even at the mention of Billy Corgan, whom nobody liked because he was such a crybaby. And Smashing Pumpkins took themselves way too seriously and were in no way punk rock. No, they were, dude. They were at first. Apparently Sonic Youth connected Nirvana with the David Geffen company, right, where they released their big album, Nevermind. Yeah. So conspiracy theorists would think that maybe there's something about this indie band suddenly signing with a giant corporation, which was ruled by a billionaire, sinister billionaire, David Geffen. Kim Gordon called both Billy and Courtney insufferable, pathetic people. They share a pathological obsession with other people and their public image. They are insanely competitive and petty. It's difficult to know if they're playing characters or if they're genuinely this insecure. And Courtney, of course, is a sociopathic narcissist, probably because of all the LSD she did before the age of 10. Insufferable name dropping and glazing of each other. Okay. Some thoughts from the internet. Courtney is a monster.
I went to school in Olympia.
Occasionally, Billy will have an interesting insight, but mostly I find him intolerable. They're in the fame game like every other pop star, but they pretend to be musical intellects with, quote, vocabulary. Billy's not a dumb person. He definitely throws out a bunch of $3 words once in a while. So he's not, rock and roll meathead with a podcast. You can sense there's some limits to his education, though, if I can say that politely. The Kim Gordon thing on the podcast, according to someone on the internet, was low-hanging fruit. Get an original thought. Courtney says, I've only done one other podcast with Mark Maron. Nobody cares, according to random person on the internet. Again, that's it. I got this out of my system. I don't ever have to, for the last time ever on this podcast at least, you will never hear me say these two names. Billy Corgan and Courtney Love. This has been Doomed Planet, a podcast about obituaries for the damned, rock star biographies, Seattle history, and other shit. You've just listened to episode 134, Bald King of Rock Star Podcasts, Billy Corgan. Oh no, I said it again. Oops. Goodbye.
Find out more at doomedplanet.com.
Vampire.